beyond 2040, and welcome to a very special edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the amazing and impressive catalogue from one of the finest bands to ever come out of Sweden. And this band has been a force since bursting onto the scene back in the early 1990s, and they are still going very strong to this day as we speak. And originally, for the longest time, I wasn't actually a fan of this band. I didn't really care for them, and I didn't really get into their music that much. But over the course of a number of years and listening to certain albums of theirs, my opinion quickly changed. I was totally blown away by how good their music was and the quality of it as well. And I've always had great respect for this band, for their musicianship, and for their composing and their playing and all of its members. But as I said, I just really couldn't get into their music that much. But there were a couple of albums that I did listen to that really won me over in a big way. And I've had the great pleasure of seeing this band live a number of times throughout the years. And for my money, they are one of the best live bands I have ever seen. And this is a band that really strives to get better. They never stay still. They're always pushing the boundaries, raising the bar, and always challenging themselves constantly. And they have gone through a lot of different changes. They originally started out as a death metal band, but then throughout the years they evolved into more of a progressive rock band, but still retained all of their dark, heavy death metal influences. And since then, I've become a huge fan of this band. They are actually one of my favorites, which is quite amazing considering that I didn't originally like these guys at all. But I think what it was for me, I just gave these guys a chance and I was proven wrong. These guys weren't just another metal band. These guys are actually something really special. And I've just finished listening to this band's entire catalogue of albums, and I was absolutely blown away by the quality of their music. And there is some amazing stuff here. And this is a band that, quite frankly, in my opinion, needs no introduction whatsoever. I am talking about, of course, the one and only Swedish progressive metal band, Opeth. So, the first time that I became aware of Opeth was through Stephen Wilson. Stephen Wilson, as we all know, he is best known as the frontman for Porcupine Tree and a million different projects. And Stephen Wilson, when I first became aware of Opeth, he guested on an Opeth album and he was brought in as a producer because Opeth had reached a point where they were burned out, they had run out of ideas, and they were just a band that really were lost. They just weren't going anywhere. And Stephen Wilson was brought in more or less to try and inject new life into Opeth. And the collaboration between Opeth and Stephen Wilson proved to be really successful. And that was the first time I became aware of Opeth. Now, the music of Opeth didn't really appeal to me at first. The whole, I'm not really a fan of growling, so that kind of put me off a little bit. But the playing and the musicianship of all of the members really impressed me. The growling is an acquired taste. I don't really like growling that much, but over the course of time with Opeth, I learned to accept that the growling is part of their sound, and over the course of the years, I grew to accept it. And I wouldn't necessarily say I like the growling. I don't, but I've grown to accept it for what it is, and on some occasions I do find it funny. But these days, the growling honestly does not bother me that much because before, when I would listen to an Opeth track, at first I would be like, oh, this actually ain't too bad. But as soon as the growling kicked in, my response was, okay, that's it. I don't need to hear anymore. I'm gone. I'm out of here. But as time has gone by, I've learned to accept that the growling is a big part of Opeth's sound. And, there are lots of great bands in the death metal genre. It's not my thing, but with Opeth, what I like about them now is they've got this really cool balance. So they've got the progressive metal on one side, then you've got the progressive rock side on the other, and then somewhere sitting in the middle is you've got the whole death metal thing. So what Opeth did was they managed to blend the best of all worlds to create a very unique package in what we now know as Opeth and their style of music. So I've learned to appreciate it, I've learned to respect it. The growling is an acquired taste for me. It's not really something I like to hear, but I've learned to live with it. In fact, I've grown more used to it, so to speak. So when I hear the growling now, I don't just run away. I'm just like, it's part of the music. That's what it is. Do I have to like it? No. But it's part of what Opeth do, and I respect that. So I've learned to accept it. So, Opeth was formed in 1990 by vocalist David Isberg, who invited longtime friend Mikael Ackerfeldt to join the band as a bass player before he would switch to playing guitar. And Opeth would initially go through a number of different members, and then eventually Isberg decided that he was going to be leaving Opeth due to creative differences, and this left Mikael Ackerfeldt as the remaining member for Opeth. And he's been pretty much at the band's helm virtually from the beginning. He's played on every single Opeth album. He's the lead guitarist, vocalist, songwriter, and composer. And as he likes to say, all round sexy beast. So he's pretty much been the driving force for Opeth since virtually the beginning, since 1992. So Opeth have had a number of different lineup changes throughout their career and their history. And the current lineup of Opeth is comprised of Mikko Ackerfeldt, Martin Mendez, Frederick Akesen, Joachim Salberg, and Walteri Väyrynen. And Opeth, throughout their history, they have gone through a number of different changes in their sound. So originally, when Opeth started, they were a very dark, heavy death metal style of band with lots of grunts and growling and dirty vocals and a very ferocious sound. And as the years have gone by, especially in more recent years, Opeth have now evolved into more of a progressive metal band with lots of progressive rock influences. So they've incorporated more clean vocals, lots of softer passages, acoustic guitars, mellotron, Hammond organ, and bass pedals to really give the band much more of a traditional progressive rock sound, but they still retain a lot of the death metal influences. And as I said, I've now become a big fan of Opeth after they started to embrace more of the traditional progressive rock style of sounding type of music. And it's proved to be a winning formula. They have really cemented themselves as one of the top bands in the world, and they are just an amazing band. and they've put out some incredible music. So, for today's special edition, I am going to be taking a look at the amazing catalogue of Opeth, which is a total of 14 studio albums. And I've just got finished listening to the band's entire catalogue, and I can tell you now, it is remarkably strong. There are some albums that are excellent, there are some albums that are classics, there are a couple of albums that are a little bit underrated. There are some albums that are quite extreme. But what you'll learn as we go through Opeth's catalogue of albums is they're all different. They still sound like Opeth, but they're all different. So what you'll be seeing is the evolution of Opeth from the beginning to where they are right now. And as always, I'm going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. Not an easy challenge, especially when you have a catalogue as strong as Opeth's. And I can tell you now, there is no bad album in Opeth's catalogue. There might be one or two albums that I feel are a little bit better than others, but as I said, I just got finished listening to the band's entire catalogue, and it was quite a trip, to say the least. It was an amazing trip, and wow, just incredible stuff. Some really good quality music from a band that really strives to get better, and they just continue to keep getting better and better with every listen. So we're going to start with the first album, and this one came out in 1985, and this one is called Orchid. So Orchid is the debut album from Opeth, and they're not quite the slick, polished juggernauts that they are now. This album is very rooted in death metal, so it's very dark, it's very heavy, lots of crunchy guitar playing, and of course, plenty of growling and grunts and shrieks and screams and all sorts going on. And at this stage of their career, this is the beginning, Opeth are a four-piece band, so two guitarists, bass, and drums. And this band, with their first album, really pack a mean punch. They hold nothing back, and holy cow, this album will really blow your head off. It's quite a dark, heavy album, but still some very enjoyable material on here. So not a bad debut album, pretty solid, but I feel that Opeth's best stuff was to come probably after this one. But it's a good start. It's a good solid start, but I feel that the best stuff was coming after. So you could kind of look at this album as a warm up. I mean, it's looked upon as a classic, but as I said, I feel that some of the albums that came after this are maybe just a little bit better, but good start though, in my opinion. So the lineup for the first half of Opeth's catalogue, it was a four-piece. So the original Opeth lineup was comprised of Mikko Ackerfeldt, Johan de Faler, Anders Norden, and Peter Lindgren. So this was pretty much the first lineup of Opeth throughout most of their history. And we're just going to have a little quick look. So there's all the lyrics. And there's more lyrics as well. So you get like pictures of the band as well in there. You've got more lyrics here, and we've got the list of who plays in the band. But as I said, it's a good, decent album. Pretty strong, considering that it is their debut. And it's quite enjoyable. As I said, it's not going to sound like Opeth we know now, but it's good. It's a pretty good album, I would say. You can't really ask for any more but the best for your first album, and they deliver. They really do. So we've got In Mist She Was Standing, which is a really good opener. Under the Weeping Moon is great. Silhouette is great. Forest of October is brilliant. The Twilight is My Robe is great. Requiem is great. And the Apostle in Triumph is great. And then we've got a bonus track called Into the Frost of Winter. Good, solid debut album. As I said, Not a terrible album, it's decent, but I feel that their best stuff would come after. But good start though, in my opinion. And the standouts for me are In Mist, She Was Standing, Silhouette, Forest of October, and The Twilight Is My Robe, and Requiem. Top to bottom, good solid album, some great material, and as I said, it's the debut album. They're not quite the polished, slick juggernauts that we will come to know them for yet. So this is more or less a band just trying to find their footing. So they're just trying to find their way and try and get themselves established. Obviously they're not quite where they would be now, but it's a good start. So there you have it. Orchid, the debut album of Opeth. Great start for one of the best progressive metal bands in the world right now. Good debut album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1986, and this one is called Morning Rise. So Morning Rise is more or less in the same style of music that was on Opeth's debut album Orchid, and it's very heavy and dark and very much in the death metal realm. And a lot of the songs on here, although there are not that many, they're quite long. So already they were starting to get into that prog rock frame of mind with lots of longer songs, which would go on to become an important part of Opeth's style of composing. So we have got 5 tracks, including a bonus track, and there's some really good material on here as well. I think Opeth are really starting to find their footing and they're more or less coming up with lots of different ideas for their song structures, and it works. It really does. So we've got the first track, which is 13 minutes long, called Advent, which is a really good opener. The Night and the Silent Water is great, which is like 11 minutes long. And then we got Nectar, which is like 10 minutes long, which is really good. And then we got the longest track on the album, Black Rose Immortal, which is like 20 minutes long. Tremendous track. And then we got another track which is almost 11 minutes long, To Bid You Farewell, which is really good. And then the bonus track we got here is Eternal Soul Torture. Good solid album, top to bottom. And what I like about Opeth as I was listening to a lot of the early albums, while there weren't that many tracks compared to some of the later albums where they would have quite a lot of songs, I've always liked the idea that with an album, you don't have many songs, but they're really long and they pack a lot in the material. So that's one thing I really appreciated what Opeth did, that they may have not had that much tracks, but they really crammed a lot. So it really felt like it was a much bigger album with lots of songs, but it was only like 5 or 6 songs. But it made it very enjoyable. So it wasn't too long, but it wasn't too short. They really reached a nice balance with their music for their albums. So the standouts for me are Black Rose Immortal, The Night and the Silent Water, and Advent. But top to bottom, very good solid album and a nice follow up to their debut album, Orchid, in my opinion. So there you have it. Morning Rise, good follow up to their debut. Good stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1988, and this one is called My Arms, Your Hearse. So pretty much this album is in the style of the first 2 albums, that dark, heavy death metal style of music. But there's still some really good tracks and there's some incredible playing from all of the guys in Opeth. But as I said, I feel that some of Opeth's better stuff would come just a little bit later on. But this is one album not to be sniffed at. There's some really good playing. There's some really good tracks on here as well. So we've got Prologue, which is a great opener. April, Ethereal is great. When is good. Mad Regal is great. The Amen Corner is great. Demon of the Fall is excellent. Credence is great. Karma is great. Epilogue is brilliant. Circle of the Tyrant is excellent. And Remember Tomorrow. Good, strong, album from top to bottom, and it's a real menacing album, but it's unbelievable. And Ackerfeld, he's just on top form. And as I said, you don't really take any notice of what Ackerfeld's doing because he's more known for the growling. You forget that he's a fantastic guitar player. A lot of the sound of Opeth is him. He's got a big, massive presence. And, as I said, he's been and is still very much the driving force for Opeth. And he's on fire, as are all of the bands. But Ackerfeld, he's just a monster, no pun intended. And he really rips it up. And some of his guitar playing on the earlier albums is just scorching, absolutely scorching. He's kind of more or less taken the back seat in more recent years. He's still doing a lot of guitar stuff, but these early albums, whew, frighteningly good guitar player, in my opinion. So the standouts for me are When, The Amen Corner, Demon of the Fall, Karma, Circle of the Tyrant, and Remember Tomorrow. But overall, good, strong album, very enjoyable, and just menacing. Just a menacing album, in my opinion. Just really dark, but very heavy, as are the first two albums as well. So there you have it. My Arms, Your Hearse. Very enjoyable album from Opeth. Great stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1999, and this one is called Still Life. For my money, Still Life is one of the best Opeth albums in their entire catalogue. This album is just fantastic, and you can really start to hear the wheels are turning for Opeth. So the first three albums, they're very much traditional death metal style of albums. Still Life is still like that, but you can start to see things are shifting in a different direction. And it's a really good album. I really enjoyed listening to this one a lot, and I would say this is one of the band's best albums, in my opinion. So we've got the first track, The More, which is 11 minutes long, just a fantastic opener. Godhead's Lament is excellent. Benighted is great. Moonlapse Vertigo is brilliant. Face of Melinda is great. Serenity Painted Death is great. And White Cluster is great, which is like over 10 minutes long. But only 7 tracks, but holy cow, do these pack a punch or what? Great stuff here. Ackerfeld, who composed the entire album, you can really start to see him coming into his own with his own identity, and he's at the helm with Opeth. But it's not a case of it's the Mikko Ackerfeld band. I mean, he is the front man, he is at the helm, but it's very much a band effort. Everyone's just pulling it all together. They're all showcased, and everyone's just on fire. They really are. And this album is, as I said, just absolutely fantastic. One of their best albums, in my opinion. And the standout tracks for me are The More, Moonlapse Vertigo, Face of Melinda, Serenity Painted Death, and White Cluster. But every track on here, top to bottom, is just tremendous and a very strong album, in my opinion. So there you have it. Still Life, one of the band's best albums, and one that I really enjoyed listening to a lot. Just a great album, in my opinion. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2001, and this one is called Blackwater Park. For my money, equally as good as Still Life. A fantastic follow up, and just a great album, in my opinion. Lots of great songs. Some of them would go on to become Opeth classics. Just a really good, strong album. And this, for me, was the beginning of Opeth, beginning the journey into becoming what we know them to be now. It's just a fantastic album and lots of great playing. Everyone's on fire and just unbelievable stuff. So we've got The Leper Affinity, which is great. Bleak is brilliant. Harvest is excellent. One of my favourite tracks from this album. The Drapery Falls is great. Dirge for November is brilliant. The Funeral Portrait is excellent. Patterns in the Ivy is great. And the title track, Blackwater Park, is just tremendous. Top to bottom, this is a very strong album and equally as good as Still Life. And the standout tracks for me are Bleak, Harvest, The Drapery Falls, Dirge for November, Patterns in the Ivy, and Blackwater Park. But the whole album, top to bottom, is incredibly strong and one of my favourites from Opeth's catalogue. Just absolutely enjoyed listening to this one a lot. So there you have it, Blackwater Park, an album equally as good as Still Life and one of the band's best albums in their entire catalogue, in my opinion. So there you have it, Blackwater Park, love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2002, and this one is called Deliverance. So, Deliverance, another great album. You can really start to hear Opeth coming into their own, and great follow up to Blackwater Park. Just a great album, and a couple of tracks on this album would go on to become classics. And some of these tracks they still play to this day. Just an unbelievable album, and Opeth are really starting to grow into that juggernaut that we know them to be now. So we got the first track, Reef is great. The title track, Deliverance, one of the best tracks on the entire album. A Fair Judgment is excellent. For Absent Friends is great. Master's Apprentice is great. And By the Pain I See in Others. Holy cow, dynamite album. Heavy, dark, packs a punch, great playing, top notch musicianship, you name it, it's all here. Standout tracks for me are Deliverance, For Absent Friends, Master's Apprentice, and By the Pain I See in Others. But holy cow, top to bottom, start to finish, a very strong album. And Opeth are really starting to hit their stride now. And the cool thing about it, they were just warming up. So there you have it, Deliverance, another great album from Opeth, and they are just absolutely kicking ass by this point. Absolutely love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2003, and this one is called Damnation. This was the album that won me over and made me a. So Opeth have completely changed. So they've gone from being the dark, heavy death metal band, and to this album, they have now evolved into a traditional progressive rock band. So there's lots of acoustic guitars, soft, clean vocals, and lots of heavy use of keyboards and mellotron and piano. And it's just a beautiful album. And it's very similar to King Crimson's In the Court of the Crimson King, but obviously a little bit different. But this album, really enjoyed this one a lot. And Stephen Wilson is featured as a guest musician on this album. He produced this album and he played on it as well. And wow, just a lovely album. Probably the band's most laid back album of their entire catalogue, but I would say it's one of their absolute best ever, and it's just a gorgeous album. Lots of great playing from Ackerfeld, and the mellotron just really gives the music that King Crimson old school edge. Just tremendous stuff. So we got the first track, Window Pane, just an absolutely lovely opener. In My Time of Need, another great track, one of my favourite tracks from this album. Sounds like Epitaph, just absolutely lovely. Death Whispered a Lullaby, excellent. Closure is brilliant. Hope Leaves is great. To Rid the Disease is great. Ending Credits is excellent. And Weakness is brilliant. But the whole album, top to bottom, is just remarkable. It sounds like a modern lost sequel to In the Court of the Crimson King, but just different. But absolutely enjoyed this one so much. And the standout tracks for me are Window Pane, In My Time of Need, closure, to rid the disease, ending credits, and weakness. But every track on here, boom, 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 it's just amazing. Just an absolutely beautiful album. And the use of mellotrons for Opeth, that would mark a massive turning point for the band. So gone are the death metal growls and screeching and heaviness, and in favour, in its place, is a much more softer, semi acoustic approach. Just holy cow, just dynamite stuff. Just a great album. So there you have it. Damnation, probably my favourite Opeth album of the entire catalogue. Absolutely love this one. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2005, and this one is called Ghost Reveries. So this marked the first album to feature a full-time keyboardist, and that is Pierre Wilberg. And having keyboards in Opeth really marked the beginning of a massive change for the band. So, with the addition of keyboards, this turned Opeth into a much more traditional progressive rock band, and the transition worked for the better. It just did absolute wonders for the band, and it really helped beef up the band and really made them sound like a traditional progressive rock band. And wow, unbelievable stuff. And this would mark the last album to feature Martin Lopez and Peter Lindgren, who were pretty much the classic members of Opeth. They had been there since the beginning, so they're gone after this album. But holy cow, Opeth were really growing into a progressive rock juggernaut, and Ghost Reveries is just an amazing album and equally as good as Damnation. So we've got Ghost of Perdition, The Baying of the Hounds, Beneath the Mire, Atonement, Riviere Harlequin Forest, Hours of Wealth, The Gren, Conjuration, and Isolation Years. Top to bottom, just a remarkably strong album, and the keyboards plays a huge part in the music and the overall sound. But absolutely love this album. And for me, I felt that once Opeth incorporated keyboards and mellotron into their sound, that was when they really won me over, because when you add keyboards to a band, regardless of what style of music they play, it changes the dynamic. And when you have a very heavy metal band like Opeth, as soon as you add keyboards, completely changes and turns them more into a traditional progressive rock band. And the change worked for the better, in my opinion. And I think that the keyboards was a true breath of fresh air for Opeth, in my opinion. And the standout tracks for me are The Baying of the Hounds, Beneath the Mire, Riviere, Harlequin, Forest, The Grand, Conjuration, and Isolation Years. But top to bottom, as I said, just a very strong album, in my opinion. So there you have it. Ghost Riviere's, absolutely enjoyed this one a lot, and just a great album from Opeth, who are really can do no wrong and just getting stronger and stronger with each album. So there you have it. Ghost Riveri's excellent album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2008, and this one is called Watershed. So Watershed would be the final album for a while to feature death metal elements and growling, as the band would go forward with a much more softer and laid back approach, very much in the traditional progressive rock style of music. And it's a really hard hitting album. Crunchy guitar playing, dark, brooding, menacing, you name it. This album has it all. And this would feature the first appearance of Frederick Ackerson and Martin Axenrot, who replaced longtime members Peter Lindgren and Martin Lopez. And Frederick Ackerson has been in the band for a really long time. He originally was the guitarist for another great band called Arch Enemy, and he's been a cornerstone for Opeth for a really long time now. Just a really good guitar player and a great foil for Ackerfeld. I think the two of them together really helped shape the sound of what we know Opeth to be, and just great additions to the band, in my opinion. Watershed really makes the hair on your arms stand up. It's just a powerful album, and as I said, just really packs a devastating punch. Just doesn't hold anything back. Let's say that, but there's some really good stuff on this album. So we've got the first track, Coil, which is a lovely acoustic track with female vocals, a great opener, which does a complete U turn and goes straight into Heir Apparent, which is the most hard hitting and heaviest track of the entire album. Absolutely brilliant and sounds like Rush Hemispheres on steroids, just unbelievably nuts and crazy. Then we've got the Lotus Eater, which is great. Burden is brilliant. Porcupine Heart, which is classic Opeth. Hessian Peel is great, and Hex Omega is great. And then we've got three bonus tracks. We've got Derelict Herds, which is an Opeth original, and we've got Bridge of Sighs, which is a Robin Trower cover, and Dan Streda Rezan, which is a Marie Fredriksson cover. Absolutely brilliant, but the whole album is just heavy beyond words, but very enjoyable. And the standout tracks for me are Coil, Heir Apparent, Porcupine Heart, and Hexomega. Just brilliant stuff. Very strong album, top to bottom. Absolutely love it. So there you have it. Watershed, one of the band's best albums, in my opinion. And this would be the final album for a while that would feature growling and death metal influences. But boy, oh boy, they really went out on a high with this one. Holy cow. So there you have it. Watershed. Great album. So we move on to the next album. And this one came out in 2011. And this one is called Heritage. Another fantastic album from Opeth. Much more of a traditional progressive rock album compared to their more death metal driven style of albums, but still really good. Some really good, strong material on here. And I kind of like this period of Opeth, this more progressive rock period that they had. I really enjoyed this a lot, and I thought there was some really good music from this time. I thought they really put out some great stuff. And as I said, if you look at the early albums to where they are with this, it's like two completely different bands, but still got some great music. But really enjoyed this period of Opeth. Some incredible stuff here. So we got the title track, Heritage, which is great. The Devil's Orchid is great. I Feel the Dark is brilliant. Sliver is excellent. Nepenthe is great. Hack's Process is great. Famine is great. The Lines in My Hand is great. Folklore is great. And Marrow of the Earth. Top to bottom, a very strong album. Much more laid back, but still classic Opeth, in my opinion. And the standout tracks for me are The Devil's Orchid, Sliver, Nepenthe, Hack's Process, Folklore, and Marrow of the Earth. Very enjoyable album and one of my favourites from Opeth. Just a really good, solid album with some very strong material. As I said, there are no bad albums in Opeth's catalogue. Obviously, there are some I feel that are a little bit better than others. There are some that I consider to be absolute classics, but like I said, there's no bad album whatsoever. So there you have it. Heritage, fantastic album, and love this style of music that Opeth were dabbling in. Just very enjoyable stuff. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2014, and this one is called Pale Communion. So another fantastic album from Opeth, and much more in the traditional progressive rock style of music, but still very enjoyable. And these guys were just knocking it right out of the park. Great album after great album after great album. These guys were just doing no wrong in my eyes, and they were just continuing to keep getting better and better with every listen. And these guys really sounded tight as a band. So we've got the first track, Eternal Rains Will Come, brilliant. Cusp of Eternity is excellent. Moon Above, Sun Below is great. Elysian Woes is great. Goblin, which is an instrumental, just fantastic. River is great. Voice of Treason is brilliant. And Faith in Others is excellent. Every track, top to bottom, no duff tracks, everything just remarkably strong. And as I said, all of these albums are very strong. You can't really sit there and say, well, that album wasn't that good. They're all good, as far as I'm concerned. And Opeth are one of those bands where, as you go through their catalogue, it continues to just keep getting better and better. So it starts off slow and eventually just really wind up to a very cool place where you say, you know what, I like this. I like this a lot. And there's some really enjoyable music with some of these albums. And the standout tracks for me are Eternal Rains Will Come, Moon Above, Sun Below, Goblin, River, Voice of Treason, and Faith in Others. But the whole album is just fantastic. Absolutely enjoyed this one a lot. So there you have it. Pale Communion, another great album from Opeth, as far as I'm concerned. Fantastic. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2016, and this one is called Sorceress. So Sorceress, another fantastic album from Opeth, and this one has got a bonus disc. So it's got a couple of bonus tracks and a couple of live tracks as well. And these guys were just really going for it. They were really knocking it out of the park and just putting out some incredible stuff. And they were just continuing to keep getting better and better. So on disc one, we've got Persephone, which is more like a little keyboard intro. Great opener and a great way to set the tone. And then it goes straight into Sorceress, which has got Ackerfeld and Frederick together with their guitars. It's just one of the most impressive things I've ever heard. And I've seen Opeth play this live a couple of times, and it's just fantastic. The whole dun, 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 just bone chilling, just incredible. Then we got the Wildflowers, which is great. Willow the Wisp is great. Carylysis is great. Sorceress True is brilliant. The Seventh Sojourn is great. Strange Brew is brilliant, and A Fleeting Glance is great. Era is brilliant, and then we got the 54-second closer, Persephone Slight Return. And we've got two bonus tracks, The Ward and 2014, and we've got three live tracks which feature Opeth performing with the Plovdiv Philharmonic Orchestra. So we've got Cusp of Eternity, The Drapery Falls, and Voice of Treason. Just absolutely amazing performances. Hearing Opeth with an orchestra doesn't get any better than that. And the standout tracks for me on disc one are Persephone, Sorceress, Willow the Wisp, Sorceress 2, and Strange Brew, A Fleeting Glance, Era, and Persephone Slight Return. And the standouts on the bonus disc are Spring 2014, Cusp of Eternity, and Voice of Treason. Excellent album, top to bottom. Doesn't get any better than this. Opeth are just on top form. So there you have it, Sorceress. Excellent album from Opeth, who are just really cooking on all cylinders. Absolutely love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2019, and this one is called In Calda Veninum. So once again, another strong album from Opeth, who are really at the top of their game and really at their musical creative peak. And this album is an interesting one because there's a little bit of a twist to this one. It's a double album, but it's not a double album of different material. It's the same album, but performed in a different language. So on one disc, you've got Opeth performing and singing in English, and on the other disc, you've got Opeth performing and singing in Swedish. So that's quite unique. There are a few bands out there who have done things like this, but this is what makes Opeth different because they can show you different sides to their musical personality and pull it off as good as anybody I have ever seen. And this album is just absolutely fantastic. Obviously, I listened to the English version, being the English guy that I am, but you know, obviously, to appreciate both sides of their personality, you listen to both discs and you can hear the differences, but it's still the same material, but just performed in a different language. It's quite cool, I think. So we got the first track, Garden of Earthly Delights is excellent, Dignity is brilliant, Heart in Hand is great, Next of Kin is great, Love, Law and Crime is great, Charlatan is great, Universal Truth is great, The Garroter is great, Continuum is great, and All Things Will Pass. This is probably Opeth's longest album. It's like 67 minutes and 57 seconds long, but it's fantastic. It's Opeth at their heaviest and at their proggy best, and they are just on top form. Doesn't get any better than that. Opeth are just absolutely kicking ass, banger after banger after banger. Doesn't get any better. Just absolutely love this. Just a great album. And the standout tracks for me are Heart in Hand, Next of Kin, Universal Truth, Love, Law and Crime, Continuum, and All Things Will Pass. But the whole album, from top to bottom, is just remarkable. Just a incredibly strong album. And as I said before, there are no bad albums in Opeth's catalogue. They're all strong. Some are better than others, yes, but all of them, by and large, there are no bad albums. It's just a very strong and enjoyable catalogue. So there you have it. Incaudilia Veninum. Absolutely an enjoyable Opeth album. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2024, and this one is called The Last Will and Testament. So this is Opeth's concept album set in post World War One, and holy cow, a lot of people have said, and I could probably agree with them, a lot of people consider The Last Will and Testament to be Opeth's best album in their entire career. And that's saying a lot, considering that Opeth have done a lot of good albums. But I could probably agree. This is certainly their strongest album to date. And apart from one track called A Story Never Told, the rest of the other tracks, they're all numbers. So number one, two, three, four, five, six, and seven. And as I said, it's a concept album, so there's no standout track as such. You have to really listen to the entire album in its entirety to really absorb the material and the piece itself. And it's just an absolute badass album. And we've got guest contribution from Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull providing spoken words and flute. Wow, talk about putting the prog in epic. It's just an epic album, very strong. Opeth at the top of their game. Doesn't get any better than this. So there's no standout track, as I said. It's just one big piece, but it's really enjoyable. It's a very complex album. You have to really listen to it in its entirety, as I said already. But it's a great experience. It's an unbelievable listening experience and really not easy listening, but it packs a punch and it's fantastic from these guys. And also, little side note here, we've got the return of the growling. The growling is back. Just in case anyone wondered. The growling is back on this album, but it's very well balanced. So you've got clean vocals and growling, but it all works really well. So there you have it. The Last Will and Testaments. Fantastic stuff. Love it. So, which Opeth album do I consider to be the best one? Well, they're all excellent, they're all different, and after listening to their entire catalogue, there are some albums that are excellent, there are some albums that are classics, there are a couple that are underrated, and there are a few that I feel are a little bit better than others, but there are no bad albums in this catalogue. Any of these albums could be a number one or an all time favourite. That's how good Opeth's catalogue really is. But if I had to choose one which I consider to be the best one, I'm definitely going with Damnation because Damnation was the one that really won me over. The addition of the keyboards and the mellotron, Stephen Wilson's involvement, everything I feel really came together. And it marked a transitional period for Opeth. They went from being a death metal band to a much more traditional progressive rock band. And this album is very much in the style and realm of King Crimson's In the Course of the Crimson King, but just in a different direction. You know, the use of the mellotrons and the keyboards and the acoustic guitars and all the other instruments as well to give that more laid back approach just was very well done and very well executed. And for me, this made me an Opeth fan, and it's just a very enjoyable album, and it's one I listen to probably the most out of the entire catalogue. There are some that I would put a little bit higher than others. You know, albums like Still Life and The Last Will and the Testament, they're a lot more stronger. But this one, this is where it all really came together, and this is where Opeth began to transition into the band that we know now. Just a fantastic album. So there you have it. Damnation, the one that I consider to be Opeth's best album. Absolutely love this one. Fantastic album. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Opeth album? Is it Orchid, Morning Rise, My Arms, Your Hearse, Still Life, Blackwater Park, Deliverance, Damnation, Ghost Reveries, Watershed, Heritage, Pale Communion, Sorceress, Incauda, Venedum, or The Last Will and Testament? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal Album Review series. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.